Picture this, it's the year 2026 and you are about to sit down to enjoy the latest masterpiece from Fromsoft. Maybe it's the next Armored Core game, maybe it's another Dark Souls game or a Sekiro 2, but either way, you've bought it. You launch it on Steam, and you're aware that it's actually a year after the game launched, exclusively on the PlayStation 5, but now it's on Steam. It's your chance to play it in PC. So you launch the game, you sign in with your PlayStation account, because you have to do that to play the game, and then the PlayStation Publishing logo flashes, and you're in. You're playing a FromSoft game, but for some reason, it looks exactly like a Sony exclusive. And that is actually something that could happen, because Sony are right now in talks to acquire Kadokawa Corp, who are the corporation who are the majority shareholder of FromSoft. And what's even more is Kadokawa have just confirmed that the talks are real. Today's story then is not rumors and scuttlebutt. It started with an exclusive scoop from Reuters, and it cited two sources familiar with the acquisition talks. But the good thing is we know it's not just that, because Kadokawa have actually responded to this. They confirmed that they have received an initial letter of intent. They don't really give away other details, but they say that if they have something to announce, they will talk about it later. Now, that means that these talks are real. It's not guaranteed that the deal will go through, but the reports are that Sony wants to increase their ownership stake of Kadokawa from 2% to 100%. Now, of course, Kadokawa is a publicly traded company. That means that shareholders would have to be consulted, but it also means that people can just buy some Kadokawa stock if they think they can make money off it. And that's actually why the Kadokawa stock price has recently jumped on this news. That's people saying, okay, Sony are going to buy this company. I should buy this company because Sony will almost certainly have to pay a price that is higher on a per share basis than what I would be buying the company for. That does show that at least some people are willing to put money down in this. So much so that Kadokawa is now trading at an all-time high. And as for Sony, well, this is also being seen as a positive, because when you're as large as Sony are, acquisitions are seen as one of the main and best ways to achieve growth. Narrowly within games, we can see why, and there's a reason why the Reuters reporting framed this as being the acquisition of the Elden Ring developer, even though it's actually far more than that. That Elden Ring's been the focus in reporting is of course no surprise, right? That game sold 25 million units, and that's before Shadow of the Erdtree came out, and Erdtree managed to sell 5 million units in 3 days, which is absolutely goofy. That is a lot of sales. And then there's the fact that Sony have already got ties to FromSoft. Sony actually owns 14% of FromSoft stock, and then Tencent own the other 16%, and of course the key thing for today's story is the other 70%, well, that's held by Kadokawa. And that means that if this deal goes through, Sony would have 86% ownership of the company. And beyond that, there's the obvious fact that the two companies have worked closely together before. And that actually brings us on to the topic of intellectual property. Sony owns the IP for Bloodborne and Demon's Souls. But if they did acquire FromSoft, it wouldn't be a complete total free win. And that's because FromSoft bought back the Elden Ring IP from Bandai Namco, seemingly using the investment that they received from Tencent and Sony. But that seemingly has not happened for Dark Souls, which is still owned by Bandai Namco. So while they wouldn't get Dark Souls, they could probably pay for it if they really wanted it, and they would get Elden Ring, which is absolutely the big bit of IP given its sales. Now, the other side of this is, of course, not PlayStation, it is Sony. Sony would be the group doing the buying here. And in a recent investor call, they confirmed plans to release a major single-player game every single year. And that's something they haven't really been able to achieve yet, given that a big premium Sony game takes, 8 million years to develop. So FromSoft absolutely fits the description here. Sony want nothing more than somebody like FromSoft who can crank out a big new game every 2 to 3 years. FromSoft are seriously impressive with their development pace. Now the question would be, how will they handle this? Would it be like Bungie, where there is initial publishing independence, or would it be just straight into the PlayStation pipeline of console exclusives that then end up having a year-long delay before they go onto PC? We don't exactly know. But somebody at PlayStation is undoubtedly working on that problem. But the key thing here is PlayStation are not the people making this decision. Sony are making the decision, and Kadokawa is more than just FromSoft, even though FromSoft is core to why Kadokawa itself is useful. There's a big old plan here the Sony big brains are trying to cook, so let's make our brains a bit bigger and a bit more wrinkly with today's sponsor. You're now a daily habit of mine. I wasted so much time doom scrolling Twitter and Reddit, but now I use Brilliant, and I have an amazing deal for you. Brilliant makes learning fun and interactive, where you learn by doing across thousands of interactive lessons in math, data science, programming, and AI, all on their gorgeous site and app. And it's not rote learning. Their method is 6 times more than lecture videos, which, having been in lectures, I absolutely feel. You see, they use interactive quizzes, right? You can click, you can drag, you can build things, you learn via playing almost, and every chance they have, they make a fun tactile visualization, and that's what makes the concepts click. Now, in today's mad world, I cannot recommend their How LLMs Work course highly enough. In that, you'll learn how LLMs actually work, which is important because that tech is coming, and if you understand it, you'll be able to reap some of the benefits while mitigating the risks, and also, you can have fun learning. Brilliant is kind of like upgrading yourself. You can pick skills and you can learn them in a bite-sized, interactive, and approachable manner, all in the time you'd usually doom scroll on your phone. Cannot recommend them highly enough, so absolutely check them out at my link down below, brilliant.org/Bellular News. There, you'll get 30 days for free, and then you'll get 20% off the annual plan. As I said, it's not just Fromsoft, it's Kadokawa, and Kadokawa own a lot. As an example, the RPG maker studio Gotcha Gotcha Games, the multiplayer network game maker From Networks, the Danganronpa developer Spike Chunsoft, and actually loads of other companies as well. And Kadokawa have also been acquiring studios, as an example, the developer of Octopath Traveler and Mario & Luigi Brotherhood. So that's a lot of games, a lot of developers, and a lot of IP. But again, that's only games. Kadokawa is actually far, far more than that, and more than you would think, because there is a lot of media consolidation within the Japanese market. Kadokawa are a machine across almost every aspect of the entertainment industry, and to explain Sony's thinking, here's a quote from their CFO, Hiroki Totoki, that very much, to the games audience, felt infuriating and honestly invalidating. So here's what he said. Whether it's for games, films, or anime, we don't have that much IP that we fostered from the beginning. We are lacking the early phase of IP, and that's an issue for us. Yeah, that is what the Sony CFO says. And that's a bit of a weird thing. We obviously think about the Sony classic IPs like Sly Cooper or Jak and Daxter, infamous Killzone, that they just don't use anymore. So that's one thing that he said, but the other thing that he said is relevant here too. He says that they've historically done a good job at finding global audiences for content that has already been market tested in its home region. And it's when we put these things together and think about Concord, about Fromsoft and Kadokawa, that this all begins to make sense. So, in a way, Concord is exactly the sort of thing that he says they want to do, actually foster new IP. And that's why him saying this right as Concord was crashing and burning was really goddamn funny, and it made them seem insane. But what Concord was new IP fostered by Sony from an early stage that was supposed to come with a whole transmedia narrative push in the form of Amazon's Secret Level series, which had one episode dedicated to the world of Concord. And the game itself was supposed to be building a world, a cast of characters, all of that jazz with its photoreal characters and the weekly cinematics and cutscenes that they'd be putting out. But of course, that's extremely expensive, right? And that is where Kadokawa gets to be interesting here. So Kadokawa already produces an Elden Ring manga, and Miyazaki has regularly teased screen adaptations of that. And that's the sort of value, right, that Sony sees. Concord did fit their big picture goals of new IP, but they started with a absurdly risky game, right? There was a total misfire and lost them hundreds of millions of dollars. But you know what's cheaper than a Sony AAA? Well, light novels and manga. And that is something that Kadokawa Corp basically has an empire over. And it's an empire that would fit very well with Sony's anime empire. They own Aniplex, Crunchyroll, multiple studios, right? So those things mesh together, but it's not just that. Kadokawa also has loads of support structures like Anime News Network and dubbing companies like Glowvision. So we can see all of the pieces here. Now I've got to bring it in to one picture of the media empire that Sony are trying to build with this acquisition. One thing that we're very used to in the West is books getting film and TV adaptations, right? Now that obviously does happen in Japan, but often at a far more blistering pace. And that's because manga and light novels are cheap and fast to make, and they're massive over there. Now, Kadokawa publishes an unhinged amount of those. And what happens is, the manga that rises up to the top will often get an anime. And if the anime works out, then it could get a spin-off. It could get a gacha game. It could get the whole works. And that's why Sony, not just PlayStation, would want to make this move. So when Totoki says about fostering new IP, what he means is Kadokawa-style projects, and we have examples of that. One of them is Delicious in Dungeon, the Netflix-distributed anime from Studio Trigger, right? It's actually kind of brilliant. Now that is actually a manga published by Kadokawa from 2014 to 2023, and it's a perfect example of what Sony wants. And I kind of hate to say it, but the word here is synergy. Now make no mistake, what this would be is a absolutely humongous consolidation of talent and production power in the hands of Sony. It would mean there's a very good chance that whenever a new Fromsoft game comes out, you don't get to play it on the console that you own, if it's an Xbox, or that if you do play it in PC, it could be late, or there could be some hoops to jump through. And that sort of consolidation is actually really bad. But again, if you're Sony, what do you need to do? You need to grow. You also need to be dominant, because it's not just about making money and getting sales. It is about curb stomping Phil Spencer to the ground, such that every time Phil Spencer tries to get up and catch his breath, you have a new single-player game to hit him with so that he cannot get up. And if you're Sony, that's what you get if you have Fromsoft. But along with that, you get an IP and media creation engine. An engine that perfectly fits your global stranglehold on anime distribution via Crunchyroll. And that's what worries me here, because while Kadokawa are massive in their own right, they're not building the same kind of games empire that Sony are making, right? So Fromsoft, when acquired, would be serving the Sony games empire, not the Kadokawa games empire. And both of those companies, of course, one of them being a first-party hardware manufacturer that actually cares about market share and platform dominance, well, they have an entirely different set of incentives. And those are incentives that are not always going to be aligned with the customer. Whereas, if you're Kadokawa or a third-party publisher, what do you want? You want sales. Therefore, you put your game everywhere, so you get sales. And therefore, the worry is simple, that the games of Fromsoft may have to adapt themselves to their new owner. Not as art, but certainly as product. But hey, I suppose if it did happen, then our chances of a Bloodborne 2 would actually go up, and given its modern Sony, it's probably a Bloodborne that would make it onto PC. So maybe there's a silver lining. And speaking of silver linings, Blizzard tried to put one around the stormy cloud that is being Warcraft 3 Reforged, but it didn't really work. Check that video out next.